In the sprawling, sun-drenched lands of ancient Greece, where gods meddled in the lives of mortals and heroes were forged in fire and tragedy, a dark saga began. This is a story of ambition, betrayal, and a curse that would echo through generations, staining a royal house with blood and sorrow. It is the tale of Pelops, a name that would be etched into the very land itself, but whose legacy was born from a truly horrific feast. This is the origin story of the cursed House of Atreus, brought to life brick by brick. Our story begins not in Greece, but in the Anatolian kingdom of Lydia, where King Tantalus ruled. Tantalus was uniquely favored by the gods of Olympus. He was often invited to their divine banquets, sharing nectar and ambrosia, overhearing their celestial secrets. But this privilege bred a terrible arrogance. He began to see himself as their equal, and to test their omniscience, he devised a plan of unspeakable cruelty. He invited the gods to a feast at his own palace, but the main course was a horror beyond imagination. Tantalus had his own son, the young prince Pelops, killed, dismembered, and cooked into a stew. He served this monstrous dish to his divine guests, watching closely to see if any would fail to recognize the meat. The gods, all but one, were immediately repulsed. They saw through the gruesome deception. Only Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, lost in her grief over her missing daughter Persephone, unknowingly ate a piece of the boy's left shoulder. The god's fury was swift and absolute. For his crime, Tantalus was cast into the depths of Tartarus, the darkest pit of the underworld. There he was cursed to stand in a pool of water that would recede whenever he bent to drink, and under a fruit tree whose branches would lift away whenever he reached for a bite, tormented by eternal hunger and thirst, a fitting punishment for his abominable feast. But what of Pelops? The gods took pity on the innocent boy, a victim of his father's madness. They decided to give him a second chance at life. Gathering his scattered remains from the cauldron, they called upon Clotho, one of the three fates, to reassemble him. Piece by piece, she brought him back to life. But a part of him was missing. The shoulder Demeter had consumed. To make him whole again, Hephaestus, the master craftsman of the gods, forged a new shoulder for him out of gleaming pure ivory. When Pelops was reborn, he was more handsome and stronger than before, marked by the divine, glistening shoulder that became his most famous feature. Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, was particularly taken with the reborn youth. He took Pelops to Olympus to serve as his cupbearer, a position of great honor. But Pelops' heart longed for a kingdom of his own, a destiny he could shape with his own hands. Armed with Poseidon's divine favor and a desire to leave his father's shadow behind, he set his sights across the Aegean Sea on the sun-drenched peninsula of southern Greece. His journey to a new life and a new curse had begun. Pelops arrived in Pisa, a kingdom in the region of Elis, ruled by the formidable King Oenomaus. The king had a beautiful daughter, Hippodamia, and a terrifying prophecy. An oracle had warned Oenomaus that he would be killed by his own son-in-law. To prevent this, he devised a deadly contest for any man who wished to marry his daughter. The challenge was a chariot race. The suitor would take Hippodamia in his chariot and race from Pisa to the Isthmus of Corinth. Oenomaus would give them a head start, sacrificing a ram to Zeus before beginning his own pursuit. But Oenomaus had an unbeatable advantage, a set of divine winged horses, a gift from his father, the war god Ares. They were faster than the wind itself. The king would always catch up, and the penalty for losing was death. He would spear the suitor from behind and take his head as a trophy, mounting it on the walls of his palace. 13 suitors had already tried, and 13 heads now served as a grim warning to all who dared to dream of winning Hippodamia's hand. But Pelops, seeing the princess, was immediately captivated. He was determined to succeed where all others had failed. He would not be another trophy on the wall. Facing an impossible race, Pelops knew mortal skill alone would not be enough. He went to the edge of the sea and called upon his patron, Poseidon. The god of the seas rose from the waves and, hearing Pelops' plea, granted him a magnificent golden chariot pulled by a pair of immortal winged horses that could even race across the water surface. With this divine gift, Pelops' chances were greatly improved, but he still feared the ruthless King Oenomaus and his war god steeds. He needed another edge, a guarantee. So Pelops resorted to a darker strategy: bribery and betrayal. He secretly approached Myrtilus, King Oenomaus' charioteer. Myrtilus was the son of the god Hermes and was secretly in love with Hippodamia himself. Pelops offered him a tempting prize, half of the kingdom, and, he deceitfully implied, the honor of being the first to spend a night with the new queen, Hippodamia. Blinded by his own ambition and desire, Myrtilus agreed. On the day of the race, he sabotaged his king's chariot. He replaced the bronze linchpins holding the wheels to the axle with fake ones he had fashioned from beeswax. The race began. Pelops and Hippodamia sped off in their golden chariot, the sea breeze whipping through their hair. Behind them, Oenomaus offered his sacrifice and began his relentless pursuit. His divine horses narrowed the gap with terrifying speed. Just as the king drew close enough to hurl his spear, the heat from the spinning axle melted the wax linchpins. The wheels flew off, and the royal chariot shattered into pieces. Oenomaus was dragged by his panicked horses, entangled in the reins, and met his violent end, just as the oracle had foretold. Pelops was victorious. He had won the kingdom and the hand of Hippodamia. But a victory built on betrayal rarely ends in peace. As they traveled back, Myrtilus demanded his reward. When he tried to force himself upon Hippodamia, Pelops, filled with rage at the betrayal, threw the charioteer from a cliff into the sea below. As Myrtilus fell, he screamed out a terrible curse, calling upon his father Hermes to bring ruin not just upon Pelops, but upon his entire family for all generations to come. With his dying breath, the curse of the House of Atreus was sealed. Despite the curse hanging over him, Pelops went on to become a powerful and respected ruler. He consolidated the kingdoms of the region under his rule, bringing an era of prosperity and strength. He was so influential and his reign so significant that the entire southern peninsula of Greece, formerly known as Achaea, was renamed in his honor, the Peloponnesos, meaning the island of Pelops. He and Hippodamia had many children, including the infamous brothers Atreus and Thyestes. Pelops established the ancient Olympic Games, or at least greatly enhanced them, in honor of his victory and to purify himself of the blood guilt from killing Oenomaus. For a time, it seemed he had escaped the consequences of his actions. His ivory shoulder gleamed, his kingdom flourished, and his name became legendary. But the dying words of Myrtilus were not just empty threats. They were a prophecy, a poison that had seeped into his bloodline, waiting for the right moment to erupt. The curse of Myrtilus did not die with Pelops. It festered in his descendants, blossoming into a horrific cycle of betrayal, murder, and vengeance that would define the House of Atreus as the most tragic in all of Greek mythology. His sons, Atreus and Thyestes, fought bitterly for the throne of Mycenae. Their rivalry led to adultery, deceit, and an act of revenge even more gruesome than the Feast of Tantalus. Atreus, discovering his wife's affair with his brother, murdered Thyestes' sons and served them to their unknowing father at a reconciliation banquet. This unspeakable crime deepened the curse, ensuring it would pass down to the next generation. Atreus' own sons were Agamemnon and Menelaus, the leaders of the Greek forces in the Trojan War. Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter, Iphigenia, to gain favorable winds for his fleet. Upon his return from Troy, he was murdered in his own bath by his wife Clytemnestra, who was avenging their daughter. This act of matricide was then avenged by their son, Orestes, who killed his mother and her lover, pursued by the terrifying Furies until he was finally absolved by the gods. The legacy of Pelops was not one of glory, but but of a river of blood that flowed from one generation to the next. A grim reminder that victory won through treachery carries a terrible price. From a boy served at a ghastly feast to a king who named a nation, the story of Pelops is a cornerstone of Greek tragedy. It teaches us that even a second chance at life, a gift from the gods themselves, cannot wash away the sins of ambition and betrayal. The ivory shoulder, a mark of divine favor, became a symbol of a tainted legacy. The curse of Myrtilus, born from a broken promise, became an unbreakable chain of suffering for his descendants, the ill-fated House of Atreus. Their stories of war, sacrifice, and familial horror have fascinated and horrified audiences for thousands of years, a timeless warning about the corrupting nature of power and the long, dark shadow of revenge. Thank you so much for journeying back to ancient Greece with us. If you enjoyed this tale of gods, heroes, and curses, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more myths and legends. Let us know in the comments which myth you'd like to see built next. See you in the next story.